Welcome to Dining with Death, Deadly Destinations. We had a hectic weekend, you'll see, and I forgot to record an opening and a closing. But come along with us today on our little tour of Long Beach, and I have an update on this case and a special guest at dinner. I hope you enjoy it. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Welcome to Long Beach, California, one of the most iconic American cities, perhaps the most iconic California beach city. This will be the last ever episode of Deadly Destinations as this channel rebrands in January 2024. Dining with Death is becoming Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. But we are going to have a travel episode from time to time, just not as regularly as we've had on Dining with Death. This place is absolutely dreamy. I love this city so much. We had a great trip here, even though at the end of the long weekend, my car had a computer problem that was a nightmare. And I learned a very expensive lesson, and I'm going to share it with you. If your car breaks down in a parking garage, and even if you have AAA, you still have to hire a small tow truck, like a repo machine, to get your car out of the parking garage and onto the street. So this was a very expensive lesson. This is Jason and I and one of our best friends, Freddie, doing everything we could to get my car working. But alas, these cars are basically just big computers and we could not. You're going to meet Freddie later in the episode. He is a gem. But even with the car problem, we had a great long weekend in this beautiful city. Long Beach was, as all American cities were, first occupied by Native Americans. The Tongva, Chumash, Luiseno, and Kumeyaay tribes all called this area home. The Tongva was the dominant tribe by the time the Spanish explorers arrived here in the 1500s. They set up some small settlements, but the area was mainly populated by the Tongva people. In 1784, the Spanish king, who had claimed the territory as his own, divided up the territory with several Spanish soldiers taking pieces of the land as their own. By 1805, the Spanish had killed many of the Tongva people and their numbers were depleted. Those that were left were basically made into slaves to build towns for the Spanish, and even they didn't last long. The Spanish brought with them diseases that the Native Americans had never been exposed to, and before long, especially the children, they were dying off in high numbers. The Spanish also overworked and starved those they had enslaved. Whenever I talk about history, I think it's important to remember the treatment the Native Americans endured as this country was taken over by settlers. Following the U.S. conquest of California, sheep farmers began to bring their flocks to this area. It was prime for year-round feeding with mild temperatures and plenty of natural pastures. The city of Long Beach was officially incorporated in 1897, and even back then, it was a seaside resort. The Pike, which is where we stayed on our trip here, was a beachside amusement area with food and games and rides for those visiting here. There was also a park on the pier. This is what it looked like in 1905, and this is what it looked like in 1925. Pretty impressive for back in the day. Oil was discovered in the 1920s, and that brought an entirely new level of growth and industry to Long Beach. In the 1930s, Henry Ford brought a large assembly plant to Long Beach that employed hundreds of workers. The city grew and the tourism industry flourished, bringing lots of visitors, with some becoming permanent residents, and I can definitely see why. This is just a gorgeous city. The weather is perfect. The average temperature here is only 85 degrees in the summer, and in the winter, it's in the low 70s. It's not windy, it's not foggy, the sun shines a lot. There is a beautiful aquarium here. There are parks and historic attractions. There's the Queen Mary that we visited on the last episode of Dining with the Deceased. Such an amazing place. And of course, there are the beaches. The beaches are simply stunning. Everything you think about when you think about California. Long Beach City Beach, in my opinion, is one of the best beaches in the States. It's clean, it's got phenomenal views of the ocean, it's just perfect. Alamitos Beach is also beautiful, also clean, and has great views. There's Junipero Beach, there is Mother's Beach and Bayshore Beach, along with Rosie's Dog Beach and the Colorado Lagoon. If you are a beachgoer, this is your paradise. The vibe here is laid back and relaxing, and there are some very good restaurants and bars as well. But today, we are here to talk about the dark side of Long Beach, the city that served as the hunting grounds for a serial killer. And not just any serial killer, one of the deadliest serial killers known to us, with almost 70 victims. This is Randy Kraft, and I am always surprised he's not more well known. He is one sick and evil individual. He was born in 1945 and is now 78 years old. You might have heard Randy called the Freeway Killer or the Southern California Strangler, but his most common moniker is the Scorecard Killer. Randy was born in Southern California to a military father and a mother who worked several jobs to help support the family. He is a very fascinating study because his upbringing is so different from most serial killers we see. His mother worked but always found time for her kids, and Randy was doted on by his 3 older sisters. He was the baby of the family, and he was very much treated that way. He was spoiled and cared for, and there don't seem to be any dark secrets in his childhood. And like I said, that's very, very different from most serial killers' childhoods, which just makes this conversation more fascinating. Randy did well in school. He was even put into accelerated classes, and his mother worked with the PTA, spending quite a bit of time at school. Sounds like everything was great, right? No. Because Randy Kraft was gay, and at that time in America, that was a big problem. Randy knew he was gay, but he kept it a secret, as many queer people did back then. But unlike most queer people, Randy grew very angry about it and dealt with a lot of self-loathing. After graduating from high school, Randy enrolled at Claremont Men's College and became involved campaigning for Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. This was 1964, and it was also the year Randy began his first homosexual relationship. In 1966, he was arrested and charged with lewd conduct after propositioning an undercover cop on Huntington Beach. You see, back then, you could be arrested just for propositioning a man if you were a man. And this is when Randy underwent a change. He abandoned his conservative views, realizing that as a gay man, his rights would always be an issue within that party, and he began campaigning for John F. Kennedy. At first, it went really well. Kennedy even wrote letters of appreciation to Randy for all he did. But then Randy started drinking really heavily, and he let the alcohol get the better of him. His grades slipped, he was doing drugs, and he was staying out all night gambling and drinking. He failed to graduate on time, but did go back and get his bachelor's degree in economics. He then joined the Air Force and rose to the rank of Airman First Class. In 1969, Randy told his family that he was gay, and his father flew into a rage. His mother was more understanding, but Randy began to really distance himself from his loving family, knowing that they were unhappy about the way he was born. That same year, Randy told the Air Force he was gay. Their response was to discharge him on medical grounds, so Randy got an attorney. The Air Force refused to change his status. And now, Randy was angry and rejected, and he moved back in with his parents and started working as a bartender. In 1970, he was charged with sexual assault for the first time. A 13-year-old runaway named Joseph Alvin Fancher met Randy in a random encounter, and Randy told the boy he could live with him. Instead, he drugged Joseph and beat him and assaulted him. Joseph ran from the apartment and got help. Randy then took an overdose of drugs and had to get his stomach pumped. Joseph refused to make a statement against Randy, and no charges were filed. In 1971, Randy enrolled at Long Beach State University in order to get his master's degree. He got into a relationship with a man named Jeff Graves, and he also got violent at that time. There are those that suspect Jeff helped Randy in some of his kills. We don't know all the details about this time period, but what we do know is that Randy claims to have killed 67 young men. We know that between 1971 and 1983, he went on a prolific killing spree. His first victim was the youngest. Most of the men were adults, and some as old as 35. Randy Kraft lured his victims into his car with promises of a ride or alcohol or both. Once the men were in Randy's car, he'd give them hard liquor, and he'd often give them drugs. When they were drunk and drugged to the point of being incapacitated, Randy would bind the men and then torture them, inflicting pain as he sexually abused them. When he was finished with them, he would strangle them, smother them, or bludgeon them to death. There were a few men found with lethal doses of drugs in their system, so even without Randy's involvement in their actual death, they would have died from the drugs they took. He did stab one victim, but one victim only. So that shows that he tried that method of killing and it didn't do it for him, which I find very interesting. Randy would then drive his victims around in the car with him. Some of them he took to his house, but not all. We know that he took some of his victims to his house because that's where Randy took pictures of their bodies. This is something we've seen with other serial killers, their own homemade pornography. But eventually, all the bodies ended up dumped on the side of a California freeway, which led to the moniker the Freeway Killer. Many of the victims had been burned with the car's cigarette lighter, and in several instances, men were found with items that had been inserted into them. Many victims were emasculated or suffered other forms of dismemberment. Like I said, this is one sick and evil man. So sick, in fact, that he kept a scorecard of his kills. This scorecard right here. On Randy Kraft's scorecard are two very neatly printed columns. There are 30 cryptic items on the left side of a yellow legal sheet, and there are 31 on the right. The scorecard is coded so that it isn't obvious what you're looking at. Randy has labeled his victims things like stable, what you got, and 2-in-1 MKV to PL. There is one labeled 2-in-1 hitch. Police were able to match known victims to 25 items on the list, but 22 victims remain unidentified. Randy had listed 67 kills on his scorecard. Some of the items are listed as victim initials, as in the case with EDM, which stands for Edward Daniel Moore. Another item is written as jail out, which refers to Roland Young, killed just hours after he was released from the Orange County drunk tank. He calls one victim Angel, one Twiggy, one Oil, and several he calls Portland. Yes, he also killed in Portland. The police began finding bodies in 1971, with the first being Long Beach resident Joseph Duquette, a bartender at the gay bar The Stable. This is obviously who Randy is referring to on his scorecard entry titled Stable. Edward Daniel Moore was next, and then there are several victims still unidentified. By 1975, 14 victims had been found and had all been linked to the same killer. A task force was formed that year with officers from Orange, Imperial, and San Bernardino counties. Months later, Keith David Crotwell was found murdered, then Larry Gene Walters, more unidentified victims, and the police weren't even on to Randy yet. Randy picked up Keith Crotwell and Kent May. He drove them around and gave them Valium, but Randy didn't know, as the three sat in a parking lot, that some friends of Keith and Kent saw them in Randy's distinctive black and white Mustang. They watched as Randy opened the door and shoved an unconscious Kent May out of the car. Kent was still alive, but he didn't go to the police. Keith Crotwell's skull was found 6 months later. The two friends that witnessed this came forward and gave a description of the vehicle. Police found it and searched the records, and then they found Randy. They called him Kent May, who denied the whole thing even happened. The police had to let Randy go. There was not enough evidence to proceed with an arrest. He continued to kill. By 1979, 12 more bodies had been found dumped along California highways. Gay bars put up posters warning customers of a predator in the area, and then Randy traveled to Oregon, where he killed there as well. They believe there are between 4 and 5 victims in Oregon. Randy came back to California and continued to kill, all throughout 1980, 81, and 82. On May 18, 1983, 2 highway patrol officers noticed Randy driving down I-5 erratically in his Toyota Celica. They pulled Randy over. He got out of the car with his pants unbuttoned, holding a beer. He obviously failed a sobriety test, and he was taken into custody for DUI. But Randy was not alone. Inside the car was a young man slumped over in the passenger seat. There were empty beer bottles and a bottle of lorazepam in the car as well. An officer tried to wake the man. He shook him, but he didn't move. He went to check for a pulse and found that the man in Randy's car was dead. The officer removed the jacket from the man's lap and found that his genitals were exposed. His hands were bound with a shoelace, and there were visible ligature marks around his neck. Randy Kraft had been caught red-handed with his last victim, Terry Lee Gambrell. Randy's car was seized. Inside, they found blood from several different victims, as well as the scorecard list and more than 50 photographs of young men in pornographic poses. Most of the men in the photos appeared to be asleep or dead. Randy Kraft was charged with Terry Gambrell's murder in May of 1983. The trial began 5 years later after an extensive investigation into the multiple murders. In 1989, Randy was sentenced to death, but this is California. Randy Kraft never did and never will see the inside of the death chamber. Like I said, there is evidence that some of Randy's kills were not committed alone, but Randy has refused to name this partner in crime. He has also refused to name the unidentified victims. Just 5 days ago, one of the unidentified victims was named. Michael Ray Schlicht was 17 years old when he died in 1974. Using genetic genealogy testing, he has now been identified. Michael was found murdered on a trail in what is now Aliso Viejo. Police are still working to identify the rest of the unknown victims. Randy Kraft is still denying them any assistance. It took over a decade to capture this monster, and many young men lost their lives during that time, but there is no doubt many more would have been killed had he not been identified. Randy Kraft will only leave prison one way, in a box, and that's just the way it should be. For our last episode of Deadly Destinations, where we always eat in our Deadly Destination, we have a special guest, our very good friend of many years, Freddie. Freddie from Philly, as we call him. Come with us to King's Fish House to have an amazing steak and seafood meal here by the ocean.
Oh, I'm Freddie.
This is Freddie, our very good friend Freddie.
We've known each other for a very long
time.
Old people.
Yeah. We met Freddie when Jason was working in North Dakota. Freddie is a hospital what do you call your administrator? CFO, and they bring him in to fix books that need fixing, so he travels around a lot. And so he happened to be at the Minot Hospital when Jason was working in the oil field in North Dakota. And we met each other, and we've been very, very close ever since. Yeah.
It's always good to get together.
Yeah, we get together as much as we can.
Alaska halibut.
We were in such a hurry to get out of the hotel and get into the Uber. I forgot my microphone.
It looks good.
So I'm really sorry.
I love halibut.
I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit as we ate because we have a special guest with us tonight, and he's had quite a bit to drink. So we're just gonna love Freddie from where he's at, which is a little bit tipsy. We started out with the oysters, and they were unbelievable. It was Dia de los Muertos, so we had lots of people in costume at dinner, which I loved. I was also dressed for Utah in late October and forgot this was California, so I was sweating like crazy. Ignore my running mascara. You guys, we're having such a good time talking and catching up. I'm not even filming the food. Hold on, let me show you what we got. Jason and I are just kind of sharing dinner because I don't have much of an appetite tonight. So I'm just having a little bit of his. Jason got a filet with mashed potatoes and asparagus, and it was all amazing. The steak was perfect, and the sides were delicious. I got my go-to when I'm by the ocean, shrimp cocktail, and shared that as well. This shrimp cocktail here, I could eat this every day. Look at this beautiful thing. Just so good. Freddie had a steak as well, and then we got dessert. Oh my gosh, you guys. Jason loves key lime pie, and it was great, but the star of the show was this butter cake. When I tell you incredible, almost as good as Gordon Ramsay's sticky toffee pudding, almost. Absolutely a 5-star dessert in the delicious and comforting department for sure.
Freddie, how was that? How's that banana? What the hell is it?
Butter cake.
Butter cake.
Butter cake. Have some.
Oh, we will. Looks.
It tastes like Mom's butter cake.
Oh, that looks so good. So moist and so rich with this delicious custard on top and house-made ice cream. Divine. This was such a fun evening with our great friend. This is what I love about food and why it's such a big part of my life. Getting together with loved ones over a meal, there's nothing like it. And I'm a little sad about removing the food aspect from my channel. I have to be honest, I am. So I hope you enjoyed this last meal ever here on Dining with Death, Deadly Destinations, and I hope you enjoyed our last tour, a tour of Long Beach, known for its beautiful beaches and its quintessential Southern California vibe, but also as the home for one of the most prolific serial killers ever known. Thanks for coming along on our tour of Long Beach and for the story of Randy Kraft, the Scorecard Killer. I sure hope you guys have enjoyed this series. It's been a lot of fun to produce, and we are still going to do some travel from time to time, but I'm going to miss this series a little bit, and I'm going to miss taking you guys along on these trips with us. So let me know if you want to see more. And again, you can like and subscribe. You can also join my Patreon, and I will see you for a few more episodes of Dining with Death, and then in January, it is an all-new channel. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dining with Death.